Hey, what is going on, guys? I've been getting a lot of questions about controller settings and sensitivity. So in today's video, we're going to go over a settings guide for controller. We'll talk about sensitivity, a few important general settings down here, and then binds as well. And with that, let's start out with sensitivity. Now, X and Y base, I would say, is really a personal preference setting. I've seen people do well as low as 0.55 or as high as 0.9. Here's a couple things to keep in mind, though, is that if you want to L2 aggressively, you're typically going to be better off with a lower base X and Y because you have to aim while hip firing a lot when using L2. So you have to rely on this sensitivity at long range. So the lower it is, the easier it's going to be to L2. But if you want to play more close range, you want to use your shotgun while hip firing, you might need to set a little bit higher. So it is a bit of a balancing act. For me, I find 7.7 to work pretty well. I think it's balanced but more favored towards long range L2. Really, you can try it out. You can try my settings, then adjust from there. It really is a personal preference setting. It's not necessarily a right answer, but obviously going too low, like 0.2, is not going to go well for you. In terms of ADS, this is really another balancing act. If you like to L2 aggressively, you want to set this pretty much as high as possible because when you're spamming L2, think about it, you're going in, out, in, out, in, out, right? Rapidly. So you're alternating between base, ADS, and the smaller the difference between the two, the easier it's going to be to use L2. But this comes at a cost. Outside of L2 range, which is 200 to 250 meters, maybe 225, it will be almost unusable aiming at long range with a high ADS or targeting sensitivity. So if you don't use L2 too much, you might want to go lower, but if you use L2 aggressively, you might want to go higher. I'd say this is more of a L2 biased ADS sense, but again, really personal preference, so you have to decide how much you want to use L2 in your playstyle. And scope sensitivity is not relevant for using L2, so this is really just up to you. Do remember that targeting and scope sensitivity are multipliers of your base. So if you increase your base, you need to lower your scope sense to have it the same equivalent effective sensitivity, if that makes sense. Okay, in terms of build and edit sensitivity, I have 1.4, 1.3. I would actually recommend you maybe set this a little bit higher if you have lower ping. I usually set it like 1.5 or 1.6 with low ping, but because I play at 130 ping, builds don't place if you set it too fast, so I tend to put it a little bit lower. Once again, this is a multiplier of your base, so if you want to like an equivalent effective building sensitivity, if you lower your base, you need to raise your building sensitivity multiplier. Okay, with that, let's move on to some of our control options here. So there are a few important ones. Aim assist is self-explanatory. Edit mode aim assist, I actually would say for beginners, I would recommend it, but as you get to like an intermediate level, I'd probably turn it off. The reason why is I do find it helpful for editing walls, floors, and cones, but stairs, when you want to rotate stairs, there's like that middle part, that middle tile that has no editable block, and when you try and push through that, you get stuck. So it makes rotating stairs a chore. So I tend to have it off, but if you're brand new to the game, you might want to try it with it on just to have a little bit of extra help with some of those other edits. Some other important things, Builder Pro build immediately is a mandatory setting, okay? Absolutely mandatory. Otherwise, you gotta double click when switching pieces, which is inherently very unoptimal. Another thing is controller edit time. Some people have been saying that you need to set this to minimum. The truth is, this actually should not matter at all. Because when we get to the binds later in this video, you should have an instant edit button. So this setting should be completely irrelevant. If you're having a situation where you have an edit hold button, I'd highly recommend you switch off of that. And then vibration, I don't recommend that, but if you find the game more fun with it on for whatever reason, you can of course keep it on. Okay, let's move on to our controller binds. So, this is going to take a bit of explaining because it may look very weird on why I have I'd say my key functionality, which I'd say is reload, switch mode, edit, and toggle pickaxe on the D-pad, and secondary functionality like inventory, map, place marker on the face buttons. That seems backwards. And this is backwards. I only recommend this configuration if you have a 4-paddle configuration. Because what I've done is I've mapped all 4 paddles to the D-pad buttons, which means I can free up the face buttons for secondary functions. The reason why is because I find the face buttons much easier to hit than the D-pad. So this works well for me, but again, this only will work if you have a 4-paddle configuration. If you play with claw or standard configs, do not use this. This is not going to go well for you. I do want to talk about some general tips, though, that'll work for everybody regardless of your configuration. First one is really important. Make sure to use down and left stick for some function. By default, it's sprint slash auto sprint. That's almost a completely useless function. I would highly recommend you put jump, edit, switch mode, something more useful here, as this is a button you can press without releasing your thumb off the stick. Another important thing is make sure you have a dedicated edit button, right? You do not want to have switch mode / edit because that means you have to hold to get into edit mode, which is inherently slow. If you have an instant edit button, then you can edit significantly faster. Another recommendation is I would recommend having crouch instead of crouch / repair. The reason why is you're just introducing an edit hold for repair, which isn't inherently a problem in itself, but what that means is you're making crouch less responsive, as now the game has to check when you press crouch, are you tapping or are you holding, which inherently will slow down the responsiveness of crouch. So I would recommend you just have crouch by itself. You can just straight up unbind repair or put repair on another button. And, you know, if you're running out of buttons, something you can always think about is if you have a keyboard connected, you can always just bind like emote wheel and all that to your keyboard and free up another button for like repair or some function like that, but that's not mandatory by any means. Okay, moving into the build controls, again, this configuration specifically will only work if you have a 4-paddle config. If you have a standard config, you need to swap the face buttons and the D-pad functions around. Some recommendations, though, for build mode that'll work for everybody. The game will try to bind useless stuff like emote, squad comms, all this random stuff that you don't need. If you really need that stuff, put it in standard mode. You don't need to be activating squad comms in build mode. You're just increasing the chance you make a mistake and press a wrong button, right? And then really the same thing applies for edit mode. Edit mode is even more egregious, where they're going to try and bind random stuff. Like, you don't need inventory in edit mode. You don't need a mode picker. You don't need squad comms. Just unbind all of this stuff. It will be much faster, and because you're much less likely to make a mistake and press squad comms while in edit mode. If you really need squad comms, go back to standard mode. One other note is I think they put reset by default on crouch, or on down and right stick. This will lose functionality for crouching, so you can always rebind this, right? Even on a regular controller, a regular configuration, you have all these buttons free, like left trigger, right trigger, or not right trigger, but left trigger in both bumpers. You can try rebinding it to one of those. You may find that useful. And then finally for dead zones, dead zones is really a preference type thing, and it heavily depends on how your controller stick drift is. What I'd recommend you do if you're not sure where to go with dead zones is to set it to minimum and then slowly increase it until you don't have stick drift anymore. Some people still prefer to fight stick drift and have it a little bit lower. That is an option. For me, I like to set it high enough to where I don't have the stick drift problem, but you know, that's really preference there. But yeah, if you're not sure, I try and find the lowest possible dead zone to where you don't have stick drift. If you have any further questions, feel free to leave it in the comments. And with that, I hope this video was helpful, and I'll catch you in the next one.